The music room smelled like old wood and chalk dust. 30 plastic chairs faced a black upright piano that had seen better days. Most of the keys were yellow now, and one of the pedals squeaked when you pressed it. But to the students of Riverside Middle School, it was just another piece of furniture they walked past without thinking. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the sixth graders filed into that room for their mandatory music class. They learned about composers who died hundreds of years ago. They clapped along to rhythms. Sometimes, if they behaved, the teacher let them take turns playing simple melodies on the piano. In the very last row, pushed against the wall near the window, sat a girl who never raised her hand. Her name was, and she was 11 years old. She had long black hair that she always tied back with the same faded blue ribbon. Her shoes had small holes near the toes, and her backpack was held together with safety pins in 2 places. She was the kind of student that teachers forgot to call on. The kind that other kids looked right through. Lived with her mother and grandmother in a small apartment above a laundromat on the east side of town. The building was old. The hallway smelled like detergent and mildew. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors arguing about money almost every night. Her mother worked 2 jobs, one at a grocery store during the day and another cleaning office buildings at night. Most days only saw her for about an hour in the evening before her mother left again, exhausted and quiet. Her grandmother was different. She was 73 years old and spoke more Mandarin than English. She spent most of her time sitting by the window, looking out at the street below, lost in memories of a life she left behind decades ago. Sometimes she hummed old songs that did not recognize. Sometimes she just sat in silence, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap. They did not have much. The apartment had 2 bedrooms the size of closets, a kitchen with a stove that only worked on 1 burner, and a television that only picked up 4 channels. There was no computer, no tablet. Did her homework on the kitchen table using library books and her mother's old phone, which had a cracked screen and barely held a charge. But in the corner of her tiny bedroom, sitting on a folding chair because there was no room for a proper stand, was a keyboard. It was not a nice keyboard. It was not even a working keyboard, really. Her grandmother had found it at a thrift store 3 years ago, marked down to $5 because 7 of the keys were broken. They did not make any sound at all when you pressed them. But her grandmother had bought it anyway, carried it home on the bus, and placed it in its room without saying a word. That broken keyboard changed everything. At first, just pressed the keys that worked, making random sounds that annoyed the neighbors. But then she started watching videos. Late at night, when her mother was at work and her grandmother was asleep, she would sit on her bed with her mother's phone propped against a pillow. She watched tutorials. She watched performances. She watched a man with gray hair explain how to read sheet music, how to position your fingers, how to feel the rhythm in your bones instead of just counting in your head. She could not practice what she learned. Not really. Not with 7 broken keys. So she did something strange. She practiced on the kitchen table. She would watch a video of someone playing a song, memorize where their fingers moved, and then replay those movements on the flat wooden surface. Over and over, night after night. Her fingers would tap silently against the table until she could feel the music even without hearing it. Her mother thought she was just fidgeting. Her grandmother noticed but said nothing. She just watched with those quiet, knowing eyes. At school, never told anyone about the keyboard. She never told anyone about the hours she spent teaching herself. When Mr. the music teacher asked the class who could play an instrument, she kept her hand down. When he asked for volunteers to perform at the winter concert, she stared at her desk. When the other kids bragged about their private lessons and their expensive instruments, she stayed silent. It was not that she was ashamed. It was something else, something harder to explain. She felt like the music belonged to her in a way that was private, sacred almost, like a secret garden that only she knew how to find. If she told people about it, they might laugh. They might ask to hear her play. And then they would see her broken keyboard and her tiny apartment and her second-hand clothes, and they would understand that she was not like them. She was not a real musician. She was just a poor girl pretending. So she watched from the back row. She listened to the other students stumble through simple songs. She watched Mr. sigh with boredom as another kid plunked out the same beginner melody for the 100th time. And inside her chest, something ached. Because she knew she could do better. She knew she could make that old piano sing. But she also knew that nobody would ever give her the chance. One afternoon, something changed. The school day had ended and most students had gone home. Was supposed to take the bus, but she had missed it because she stayed late at the library finishing a book report. The next bus was not for another hour. She wandered the empty hallways, looking for somewhere quiet to wait. That was when she heard it. The auditorium doors were open just a crack, and from inside came the sound of a piano, but not the old upright from the music room. This was different. This was richer, deeper, like the difference between a whisper and a full voice. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The auditorium was dark except for a single light above the stage. And there, in the center of that stage, sat the most beautiful piano she had ever seen. It was a grand piano, black and shining, its lid propped open like a wing. A senior student was sitting at the bench, practicing something complicated, his fingers flying across the keys. Stood frozen in the doorway. She had never seen a grand piano in real life before. She had only watched them in videos, always assuming they existed in some other world. A world of concert halls and wealthy families and people who had never worried about paying rent. The senior finished his piece, gathered his sheet music and walked off the stage without noticing her. The auditorium fell silent. The piano sat there, waiting, glowing under that single light like something from a dream. Did not make a decision. Her feet just moved. She walked down the aisle between the empty seats, climbed the small stairs to the stage and stood in front of the piano. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She reached out and touched one of the keys. Just touched it, not even pressing down. The ivory was cool and smooth under her fingertip. She looked around. The auditorium was empty. The doors were closed. Nobody would know. She sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on the keys, the way she had practiced 1,000 times on her kitchen table. And then, very softly, she began to play. The sound that came out was nothing like her broken keyboard. It was full and warm and alive. It filled the empty auditorium like water filling a glass. Closed her eyes and let her fingers move the way they had been wanting to move for 3 years. She played a piece she had memorized from a video, something by a composer whose name she could not pronounce. She made mistakes. She stumbled in places, but she did not stop. When she finished, her hands were shaking. She sat in the silence for a long moment, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then she heard a sound from the back of the auditorium, a door closing, footsteps. Someone had been watching. Blood turned cold. She spun around on the bench, her eyes searching the darkness at the back of the auditorium. For a moment, she saw nothing, just rows of empty seats stretching back into shadow. Then a figure stepped forward into the dim light near the exit doors. It was Mr. Williams, the school janitor. He was an older man with gray hair and a kind face, always pushing his cleaning cart through the hallways, always nodding hello to students who never bothered to nod back. He stood there with his mop in one hand, looking at her with an expression she could not read. His throat tightened. She was not supposed to be here. She was not supposed to touch this piano. She waited for him to yell at her, to tell her to leave, to report her to the principal. But Mr. Williams did not yell. He just stood there for a long moment, then slowly nodded his head. "That was real nice," he said quietly. His voice echoed in the empty space. "You got a gift, young lady." Then he turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. Sat frozen on the bench, her heart still racing. She did not know what to think. She did not know if she was in trouble or not. But something about the way he said those words stuck with her. You got a gift. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her before. Not about music. Not about anything. She slipped off the bench, took one last look at the beautiful piano, and hurried out of the auditorium before anyone else could find her. For the next few weeks, tried to forget what happened. She went to her classes. She sat in the back row of music class. She practiced on her broken keyboard at home and on the kitchen table when the keyboard was not enough. She told herself that the moment in the auditorium was just a one-time thing, a stolen moment that would never happen again. But she was wrong. Word had gotten out. She did not know how. Maybe Mr. Williams had mentioned it to someone. Maybe another student had walked past the auditorium that day and heard her playing through the doors. However it happened, by the end of the month there was a rumor floating around school, a rumor about the quiet girl from the back row, the one with the faded clothes and the second-hand backpack. People were saying she could play piano, really play. First noticed something was wrong on a Thursday afternoon. She was walking to her locker after her last class when she saw a group of students standing in the hallway blocking her path. There were 4 of them, all 8th graders, all members of the school's advanced music program. They had matching jackets with musical notes embroidered on the front. They took private lessons. They performed at school concerts. They were everything was not. The one in front was a girl with perfectly straight hair and expensive shoes. She looked at the way someone might look at a bug on the sidewalk, curious, a little disgusted. "So you're the one," the girl said, "the one everyone's talking about." Clutched the strap of her backpack. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play dumb." The girl stepped closer. "People are saying you snuck into the auditorium and played the grand piano. They're saying you're actually good." She said the last word like it was a joke, like the idea of being good at anything was the funniest thing she had ever heard. The other students laughed. One of them, a boy with gelled hair, crossed his arms over his chest. "There's no way, look at her. She probably can't even afford lessons." Felt her face burn. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear, but her feet would not move. "I think she's lying," another girl said. "I think she made the whole thing up for attention." "Then let's find out," said the first girl. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Let's take her to Mister. Let's see if she can really play or if she's just a liar." Before could say anything, they grabbed her arm and started pulling her down the hallway. She tried to resist, but there were 4 of them and one of her. Students turned to stare as they passed. Some whispered. Some laughed. Felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. They pushed through the door of the music room. Mister was sitting at his desk, grading papers. He looked up with surprise when the group burst in, dragging with them. "What's going on here?" he asked, setting down his pen. The girl with the straight hair stepped forward, still holding his arm. "Mister, there's been a rumor going around that this girl can play piano. We think she's lying. We think she should have to prove it." Mister frowned. He really looked at her maybe for the first time all year. She was small for her age, her clothes were worn, her eyes were red and scared. He felt a flicker of something in his chest. Guilt, maybe. He had never paid much attention to this girl. He did not even remember calling on her once. "Is this true?" he asked gently. "Can you play?" Opened her mouth, but no words came out. She did not know what to say. If she said yes, they would make her prove it. If she said no, they would call her a liar anyway. Either way, she lost. The boy with the gelled hair laughed. "See, she can't even answer, she's got nothing." Something shifted in Mister's expression. He did not like bullies. He did not like seeing a student cornered like this. But he also did not know how to stop it without making things worse. So he made a decision that he would think about for a long time afterward. "All right," he said slowly. "If she says she can play, I'll let her try, but it has to be fair. She can choose any piece she wants." The girl with the straight hair shook her head. "No, that's too easy. If she's really as good as people say, she should be able to play something difficult." She looked at her friends and they all smiled. "How about Chopin's Ballade No. 1, in G minor?" A cold silence fell over the room. Mister's eyebrows shot up. That piece was legendary. It was one of the most difficult piano compositions ever written. Professional pianists spent years mastering it. Even his best students, the ones with private teachers and thousands of dollars worth of training, could not play it. Asking a sixth grader to perform it was not a challenge. It was a trap. "That's not reasonable," he said. "That piece is too advanced for anyone in this school." "Then she can just admit she was lying," the girl said sweetly, "and we can all move on." Felt the walls closing in around her. She could see it in their faces. They had already decided she was nothing. They had already decided she would fail. They were just waiting for her to prove them right. But somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear and the shame and the years of being invisible, something else was waking up. Something hot and stubborn and tired of being small. She thought about her broken keyboard. She thought about the hours on the kitchen table. She thought about her grandmother's quiet eyes and the way Mr. Williams had nodded at her in the dark auditorium. "You got a gift, young lady." Maybe she did, maybe she did not, but she was tired of hiding. Lifted her chin and looked directly at the girl with the straight hair. Her voice came out quiet but steady. "I'll do it." The room went silent. "But I need 1 week," she said. "Give me 1 week to prepare." The girl laughed like she had just heard the funniest joke in the world. "Fine, 1 week, but when you fail in front of everyone, don't say I didn't warn you." They let go of her arm and walked out of the music room, still laughing. Mr. watched them go, then turned back too. His face was troubled. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "That piece, it's not possible, not in a week, not for anyone." Looked at him. For a moment she almost agreed, almost backed down. But then she remembered all the nights she had spent teaching herself in the dark, all the invisible hours, all the silent practice on a table that was not a piano. "I know," she said, "but I'm going to try anyway." She walked out of the music room before he could say anything else. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. She had just made a promise she was not sure she could keep. But for the first time in her life, someone was going to see her. 1 week, 7 days, that was all she had. And it would have to be enough. That night sat on her bed with her mother's phone, searching for videos of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. When she found one and pressed play, her stomach dropped. The piece was almost 10 minutes long. It started soft and sad, like someone telling a story about something they had lost, but then it grew. It twisted and turned through emotions she did not have words for. There were parts that sounded like a storm, parts that sounded like a heart breaking. And the speed, the technical difficulty, fingers flying across the keys so fast they blurred on the screen. She watched the whole thing 3 times, and each time she felt smaller. What had she done? What had she agreed to? She looked at her broken keyboard in the corner of the room. 7 dead keys. No pedals. A sound like a toy compared to a real piano. How was she supposed to learn the most difficult piece in the world on that? But then she thought about the girl with the straight hair, the way she had laughed, the way she had said, "When you fail in front of everyone." And something hard settled in his chest. Not confidence, not hope, just stubbornness. A refusal to give them what they wanted. She stayed up until 3 in the morning that first night. She watched tutorial videos that broke the piece into sections. She watched a man with white hair explain the fingering, the phrasing, the places where most students made mistakes. She wrote notes in a battered notebook. She memorized the first page of the sheet music just by looking at it, the way she had taught herself to do over the past 3 years. Then she went to her keyboard and started to practice. The broken keys forced her to skip notes, to imagine sounds that were not there. It was like trying to paint a picture with half the colors missing, but she did it anyway, over and over, until her eyes burned and her fingers ached and the first gray light of morning crept through her window. She got 2 hours of sleep, then she woke up and went to school. The next morning, arrived at school an hour before anyone else. She walked around to the back entrance, where the janitors brought in supplies, and waited in the cold. Her breath made little clouds in the air. Her fingers were numb inside her thin jacket. After 10 minutes, a door opened. Mr. Williams stood there, mop in hand, looking at her with those calm, knowing eyes. "Figured you might show up," he said. "Swallowed, I need to practice, on the real piano, the one in the auditorium." She paused. "Please." Mr. Williams studied her for a long moment. He had worked at this school for 19 years. He had seen a lot of students come and go, the talented ones, the lazy ones, the ones who thought they were better than everyone else. But there was something different about this girl, something in her eyes that reminded him of his own daughter, who had wanted to be a dancer before life got in the way. "Auditorium's supposed to be locked until 8, he said slowly. "Teachers don't come in until 7:30. He scratched his chin. "I suppose if someone happened to leave that side door unlocked by accident, and if someone happened to slip in for an hour or so, well, I probably wouldn't notice." Felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Mr. Williams just nodded and stepped aside to let her in. "Go on then, and don't let anyone see you." From that day on, had a routine. She woke up at 5 in the morning. She took the early bus to school, the one that only the janitors and cafeteria workers used. She slipped into the auditorium through the side door that Mr. Williams always left unlocked, and she practiced on the grand piano until 7:15, when she had to sneak out before anyone else arrived. Then she went to her classes. She sat in the back row. She kept her head down. She pretended nothing was different. At home each night, after her mother left for her second job, practiced on her broken keyboard until her grandmother made her stop. Then she moved to the kitchen table, playing the piece on the flat wooden surface, her fingers tapping out rhythms that only she could hear. She watched videos until her vision blurred. She fell asleep with the music still running through her head like a river. By day 3, her fingers were raw. Small blisters had formed on the tips, and one of them had burst and bled onto the keys of her keyboard. She wrapped them in bandages made from torn strips of an old shirt. She kept practicing. By day 4, she could play the first 3 pages from memory, not perfectly, but close. The middle section was still a mess. The fast parts tripped her up every time, but she was getting closer, note by note, measure by measure. On day 5, she nearly gave up. It was late, almost midnight. Her mother was at work. Her grandmother had gone to bed hours ago. Sat at the kitchen table, her bandaged fingers moving across the wood, and suddenly she just stopped. The exhaustion hit her all at once, like a wave pulling her under. Her eyes filled with tears. Her hands dropped to her sides. She could not do this. She was fooling herself. 1 week was not enough. A lifetime would not be enough. She was just a poor girl with a broken keyboard, pretending to be something she was not. She put her head down on the table and cried, quietly so she would not wake her grandmother. Her shoulders shook. Her tears made a small wet spot on the wood. She did not hear the footsteps behind her. A thin, wrinkled hand touched her shoulder. Looked up to see her grandmother standing there in her old nightgown, her gray hair loose around her face. She looked at with an expression that was hard to read. Sad, maybe, but also something else, something deeper. Her grandmother sat down slowly in the chair beside her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out and took hands in hers, turning them over to look at the bandaged fingers. "Your grandfather," she said quietly, her accent thick on the English words, "he played piano." Blinked what? In China, before everything changed, he was a concert pianist, very famous in Beijing. Her grandmother's eyes grew distant, looking at something far away. He played for thousands of people. He made them cry with his music, made them feel things they had forgotten how to feel. Stared at her. In 11 years, her grandmother had never told her this. She had never talked about her grandfather at all. He had died before was born, and her mother never mentioned him. "What happened to him?" whispered. Her grandmother was quiet for a long time. "The world changed. We lost everything, our home, our money, our place in society. We came to America with nothing. He never played again." She paused. It broke something inside him. He died a few years later. Did not know what to say. Her grandmother had never spoken this many words to her at once. The old woman squeezed her hands gently. When I saw you with that keyboard, I knew. The way you touched the keys, the way you listened. It is in your blood, child. Your grandfather's gift did not die with him. It has been sleeping, waiting. She looked into his eyes, waiting for you. Felt something shift inside her chest. The exhaustion was still there. The doubt, the fear. But underneath it all, something else was growing. A warmth. A sense of connection to something bigger than herself. Her grandmother stood up slowly, her old bones creaking. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "Do not give up," she whispered. "He is watching, I know he is." Then she shuffled back to her room, leaving alone at the kitchen table. Sat there for a long time, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Her grandfather had been a concert pianist. He had played for thousands, and now, somehow, his gift had found its way to her. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked down at her bandaged fingers. Then she placed her hands on the table and started practicing again. 2 more days. She had 2 more days. And she was not going to waste a single minute. The day arrived on a Friday afternoon. Gray clouds hung low over the school, and a light rain tapped against the windows like nervous fingers. Had barely slept the night before. She had practiced until 2 in the morning, then lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart beating too fast, her mind running through the piece over and over until the notes blurred together. She went to school in a daze. She could not remember what her teachers said in any of her classes. She could not remember eating lunch. The whole day felt like a dream she was floating through, waiting to wake up. By the time the final bell rang, word had spread through the entire school. Everyone knew about the challenge. Everyone knew about the quiet girl who had promised to play an impossible piece. Students who had never spoken to were whispering about her in the hallways. Some were curious. Some were mocking. Most just wanted to see what would happen. The music room was too small for the crowd that wanted to watch. So Mr. had made arrangements. The challenge would take place in the auditorium, on the grand piano, in front of whoever wanted to come. Stood outside the auditorium doors, her hands trembling at her sides. She could hear the noise from inside. Hundreds of voices talking at once. Laughter, the scraping of chairs. It sounded like the whole school had shown up. She looked down at her clothes. She was wearing the nicest thing she owned, a simple dark blue dress that her mother had bought at a thrift store 2 years ago. It was a little too big and a little out of style, but it was clean and it did not have any holes. Her shoes were the same ones she always wore, the ones with the small holes near the toes. She had tried to cover them with a black marker that morning, but it had not worked very well. She thought about running, just turning around and walking out of the school and never coming back. Nobody would blame her. Nobody expected her to actually go through with this. She could disappear, and in a few weeks everyone would forget her name. But then she thought about her grandmother's words. Your grandfather's gift did not die with him. It has been sleeping, waiting for you. She thought about Mr. Williams, who had trusted her with the auditorium every morning for a week. She thought about all the hours on the kitchen table, all the silent practice, all the nights she had fallen asleep with music running through her dreams. She had come too far to run now. Pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was taken, and students were standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. Teachers had gathered near the back, watching with curious expressions. Even the principal was there, standing by the exit with her arms crossed. And in the front row, right in the center, sat the girl with the straight hair and her friends. They were smiling, confident, ready to watch fail. The room went quiet as walked down the aisle. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. She could hear whispers following her like shadows. Her legs felt weak. Her mouth was dry. But she kept walking, one step at a time, until she reached the stairs that led up to the stage. The grand piano sat under a single spotlight, just like it had that first day when she had snuck in after school. It looked even more beautiful now, even more terrifying. Climbed the stairs. Her worn shoes made soft sounds on the wooden stage. She walked to the piano and stood beside it, looking out at the sea of faces staring back at her. For a moment she could not move, could not breathe. The silence pressed against her like a weight. Then she saw him, Mr. Williams, standing in the shadows at the side of the stage near the curtain. He gave her a small nod, just a tiny movement of his head, but it was enough. Sat down on the bench. She adjusted her position the way she had practiced 1,000 times. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory under her fingertips. She closed her eyes. The auditorium held its breath. And then she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated into the silence like a whisper, soft, sad, searching. Let her fingers find their way across the keys, playing the opening melody that she had memorized in her tiny bedroom on a broken keyboard. The notes hung in the air, delicate and fragile, like something precious that might shatter if you held it too tightly. In the audience, a few students shifted in their seats. This was not what they had expected. They had expected her to stumble, to freeze, to prove that she was nothing but a fraud, but the music kept coming, growing stronger with each measure. Moved into the second section, where the melody began to build. Her right hand danced across the upper keys while her left hand provided a rolling, wave-like accompaniment. The music swelled, filling the auditorium with sound. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion, each petal unfolding to reveal something more beautiful underneath. Mr. sat in the third row, his mouth slightly open. He had taught music for over 20 years. He had heard countless students play countless pieces, but he had never heard anything like this. This was not just technical skill. This was something deeper, something that could not be taught. The piece moved into its stormy middle section, where the notes came faster and harder, crashing against each other like waves in a hurricane. Fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly, her eyes still closed, lost in a world that only she could see. In the front row, the smile had faded from the face of the girl with the straight hair. She sat rigid in her seat, her hands gripping the armrests. Beside her, one of her friends had tears running down her cheeks. She did not even seem to notice. The music softened again, moving into a passage of heartbreaking beauty. Played it like a prayer, each note carrying the weight of everything she had never been able to say. The loneliness of being invisible, the pain of being poor, the love she felt for her mother and grandmother, the ghost of a grandfather she had never met but somehow knew. Somewhere in the back of the auditorium, a teacher wiped her eyes with a tissue. The principal had uncrossed her arms and was leaning forward, watching with an expression of pure wonder. Entered the final section of the piece, where all the themes came together in a thundering climax. Her hands moved so fast they were almost a blur. The piano sang with a voice that seemed too big for one instrument. The sound filled every corner of the auditorium, wrapping around the audience like a living thing. And then with one final cascade of notes, it was over. Lifted her hands from the keys. She opened her eyes. The last echoes of the music faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The auditorium was completely still. Sat on the bench, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, suddenly terrified that she had done something wrong, that they had hated it, that she had failed after all. Then someone started clapping. It was Mr. Williams, standing in the shadows at the side of the stage. His rough, calloused hands came together once, twice, 3 times. The sound broke the silence like a stone breaking the surface of a still pond. And then everyone was clapping. The applause exploded through the auditorium like thunder. Students rose to their feet, one row after another, until the entire audience was standing. People were cheering. People were crying. The sound washed over in waves, so loud she could feel it vibrating in her chest. She looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed, not quite believing what was happening. She saw the girl with the straight hair, still sitting in her seat, not clapping, her face pale and stunned. She saw Mister standing with tears streaming down his face, applauding so hard his hands must have hurt. She saw teachers hugging each other. She saw students she had never spoken to shouting her name. Did not know what to do, so she just sat there on the bench, her hands folded in her lap, and let the applause wash over her like warm rain. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. For the first time in her life, everyone could see her. And it felt like coming home. The applause lasted for nearly 3 minutes, lost count somewhere in the middle. She just sat there on the piano bench, her hands still trembling, watching the crowd of students and teachers who had come expecting to see her fail but had witnessed something else entirely, something none of them would ever forget. When the clapping finally died down, stood up on shaky legs and walked off the stage. She did not know where to go. She did not know what happened next, but before she could reach the stairs, someone stepped into her path. It was Mr. He stood there with red eyes and wet cheeks, looking at her like he was seeing her for the very first time. For a long moment, he did not say anything. Then slowly, he knelt down so that his face was level with hers. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was rough, like the words were hard to get out. "I have been teaching at this school for 23 years. I thought I knew how to spot talent. I thought I knew which students were worth my time." He paused and shook his head. "I was wrong. I looked right past you. I never called on you. I never gave you a chance. And that is something I will regret for the rest of my life." Did not know what to say. She had never had a teacher apologize to her before. She had never had anyone admit they were wrong about her. Mr. reached out and took her hands in his. Her small, bandaged fingers disappeared inside his larger palms. "You have a gift," he said quietly, "a real gift, the kind that comes along once in a generation, and I promise you from this day forward I will never overlook a quiet child again. I will never assume that the students in the back row have nothing to offer." He squeezed her hands gently. "You taught me that, thank you." Felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak, and Mr. stood up and stepped aside to let her pass. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Everything changed, and it changed fast. Mr. made phone calls, lots of them. He called music schools and conservatories and organizations that helped young musicians. He told them about. He sent them a video that someone had recorded on their phone during the performance. He did not stop until someone listened. 3 weeks after the auditorium performance, came home from school to find her mother and grandmother sitting at the kitchen table. They looked serious. For a moment, was afraid something bad had happened. Then her mother held up a letter. "It's from a music school," she said. Her voice was shaking. "A famous one in New York City. They saw a video of you playing." She paused and tears spilled down her cheeks. "They want to give you a full scholarship. Everything paid for, tuition, housing, everything." Stood frozen in the doorway. She read the letter 3 times before the words started to make sense. A full scholarship to one of the best music schools in the country. For her, the girl with the broken keyboard and the holes in her shoes. Her grandmother rose slowly from her chair and walked over too. She cupped her granddaughter's face in her wrinkled hands and looked into her eyes. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered, "so proud." That night the 3 of them sat together in the tiny living room, eating a simple dinner and talking about the future. For the first time in years, they talked about dreams instead of bills, about possibilities instead of problems, about what might become instead of what they could not afford. The news spread quickly. Local newspapers picked up the story, then bigger newspapers, then television stations. The story of the girl who taught herself piano on a broken keyboard, who practiced on a kitchen table, who learned an impossible piece in 7 days and stunned an entire school, seemed to capture something that people needed to hear. It reminded them that talent can bloom in the most unexpected places, that poverty does not erase potential. That sometimes the people the world overlooks are the ones with the most to give. Donations started arriving at the school. People sent money for music programs, for instruments, for scholarships for other students who could not afford lessons. A famous pianist, a woman who had performed in concert halls around the world, saw the video online and was so moved that she did something extraordinary. She arranged to have a piano delivered to his apartment. Not just any piano. A restored grand piano, black and gleaming, the kind had only ever dreamed about. When the delivery truck pulled up outside the laundromat, thought there had been a mistake. She watched 4 men carry the enormous instrument up the narrow stairs, grunting and sweating, maneuvering it around corners that seemed too tight. When they finally set it down in the living room, it took up almost half the space. There was barely room to walk around it. But when sat down and played the first notes, none of that mattered. The sound filled the tiny apartment like sunlight filling a dark room. Her mother stood in the kitchen doorway, crying. Her grandmother sat in her chair by the window, smiling for the first time in years. Went to the music school in New York. She studied with teachers who had performed on the greatest stages in the world. She practiced for hours every day, no longer on a broken keyboard or a kitchen table, but on instruments that responded to her every touch. She learned pieces she had only ever watched in videos. She grew. She improved. She became the musician she had always known she could be. By the time she was 16, she performed at Carnegie Hall, the same stage where legends had played. The auditorium was packed with thousands of people, all there to hear the girl who had taught herself piano in a tiny apartment above a laundromat. When she walked onto that stage and sat down at the grand piano, she thought about her grandfather, the concert pianist from Beijing who had lost everything but whose gift had somehow survived, sleeping in his bloodline, waiting for her. She thought about her grandmother, who was watching from the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs for years just to keep them fed. She thought about Mr. Williams, who had unlocked the auditorium door every morning so a poor girl could practice in secret. She thought about Mr., who had learned to see the students he used to ignore. And then she played. The audience gave her a 10-minute standing ovation. But story did not end there. Success did not make her forget where she came from. It made her remember even more clearly. When she was 22 years old, she used the money she had earned from performances to start a foundation. A small one at first, just enough to buy instruments for children who could not afford them, just enough to pay for lessons for students whose families struggled to make rent. She named it after her grandfather, the concert pianist who never got to play again. The foundation grew. More donations came in. More children received instruments. More quiet kids in the back rows of classrooms around the country were given a chance to be heard. Today, thousands of children have received help from the foundation. Pianos and violins and guitars have found their way into homes where music once seemed like an impossible dream. Teachers have learned to look more carefully at the students who do not raise their hands. And somewhere, in a school you have never heard of, another child is sitting in the back row, hiding a gift that the world has not yet discovered. Still performs. She still travels the world, playing on the greatest stages for audiences who hang on every note. But her favorite performances are the small ones, the ones in school auditoriums and community centers where she plays for children who remind her of herself. Children with worn clothes and big dreams and that quiet fire burning behind their eyes. After every performance, she stays to talk to them. She tells them her story. She tells them about the broken keyboard and the kitchen table and the 7 days that changed her life. And she always ends with the same words. The world might not see you yet, she says, but that does not mean you are invisible. It just means your moment has not come. Keep practicing, keep believing, and when your chance arrives, do not be afraid to take it. Because sometimes the most extraordinary gifts are hiding in the quietest corners. And all they need is someone willing to listen.